being here and want to thank you all for your support. When we originally moved our tournament from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, it was with a belief that there was a chance to raise the profile of the event, the atmosphere, the excitement, the overall environment for the student athletes and our programs, and really, create a destination for our fans they look forward to. And I think we've made a lot of progress against that. In the few years we've been here, we achieved our first sellout in our last year at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. And then, of course, last year, our first year here at T-Mobile Arena, we achieved record attendance for this tournament with 87,000 fans attending the 4 days last year. And we had our first season sellout here, and the largest crowd that we've ever had for one session of our basketball tournament, 19,000 last Friday night. And with the support of our partners at MGM, AEG, Las Vegas Events, and our broadcast partners, ESPN, Fox, and the Pac-12 networks, this event has really helped with the overall platform and showcase for our teams. And we've really made a lot of progress in terms of making it an event beyond what happens inside the arena, as evidenced by what's happening in Pac-12 Fan Plaza and really throughout the city. For all these reasons, I'm pleased to be able to announce tonight that we are extending our agreement with Las Vegas for the men's tournament for an extra year. So we'll be here through 2020 with our men's tournament, and we're going to be moving the Pac-12 women's basketball tournament to Las Vegas starting next year for 2 years for the 2019 and 2020 tournaments at least. This will give us an opportunity to showcase the best of Pac-12 men's basketball and women's basketball over a 2-week period. So the women's event will stay in its current date, which is the week before the men's tournament, followed by the men's. Moving the women's event here was precipitated by some exciting things happening in Seattle with our partners there at Ncaa Arena, who are going to be going through what I'm told is about a $600 million renovation of that facility. As they get ready for possible NHL franchise and other events that are there. So we had to look for other options, and we didn't have to look very far, given the success that we've had here in Las Vegas. Thanks to the help of our partners, there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm amongst our women's basketball community to see how we can build upon now the 6-year experience that we have here, the platform that we built, the experience with our partners, and the enthusiasm of our fans to hopefully benefit our women's basketball programs as well. The 2019 women's event will be held at the MGM Grand Garden Arena, where we played the men's event previously, and the 2020 edition will be at Mandalay Bay, which happens to also be the venue for a WNBA franchise, which was one of the other reasons we're excited about Las Vegas. They have a commitment to women's basketball with WNBA, and needless to say, a lot of exciting things going on here in the world of sports and entertainment. But they're committed to women's sports, committed to women's basketball. They're going to have dedicated full-time people working on promoting their WNBA franchise. And yeah, we're optimistic for this 2 weeks of Pac-12 basketball that will be here. Looking at what's happening on the court, it's been a really exciting year for Pac-12 basketball. I can't recall a season that's been more wide open and close and unpredictable in terms of how our teams would wind up. And we've been looking forward to this tournament, and we've had a lot of compelling games so far, including 2 overtime games yesterday. So the competition is not disappointed. A lot to play for several of our teams here that have come into this tournament with a chance to earn their way into the Ncaa tournament and earn good seedings. And we've already seen it so far, and I'm looking forward to this evening's games as well as tomorrow and Saturday. There's a lot on the line for our teams, but we've been very deep and competitive, and it's been very interesting to see the trajectory of our teams throughout the season. And yeah, Pac-12 basketball is in a good place. A few new things I wanted to highlight at this year's tournament. You'll see that in year 2 here at T-Mobile Arena, we've really taken more full advantage of being near the Strip and the Pac-12 Fan Plaza outside. One of the areas of excitement for us in being this venue was the big area outside, adjacent to the Strip. Last year, we tested a few things in terms of fan entertainment. This year, we came back and really leveraging the opportunity, even more so there, not just band and cheer and other interactive activities, but Pac-12 Networks has a studio out there. In fact, as I was getting ready to come in and see you all, I saw Nick Foles being interviewed out there. And something that wouldn't have happened if the hosts were back in San Francisco. So a great example of how the excitement that happens in the arena during the games is now translating outside to the Pac-12 Fan Plaza. It was great seeing Nick being interviewed by our hosts, surrounded by a bunch of Arizona fans, and there was a lot of electricity and excitement. So from my perspective, that's a little peek as to what this event can really continue to become: compelling, exciting basketball and entertainment inside the arena, which can translate outside the arena, throughout Las Vegas and certainly right outside T-Mobile Arena. We've also announced that tomorrow our Pac-12 Hall of Honor, our equivalent of a Hall of Fame, has got a new twist and is expanding in its scope. Historically, the Pac-12 Hall of Honor has honored the legendary figures in the history of Pac-12 men's basketball. We had an experience last year after the Rio Olympics where we used the basketball tournament to honor some of the successful Olympians from the Rio Olympics. The United States Olympic Committee wanted to promote the connection between collegiate sports and the Olympics, and we used the platform of our basketball tournament to honor some well-known Olympians from our schools. It was so well received by our university administrators, by fans. We brought the Olympians out to on the court. We decided to use this event as a showcase for Pac-12 sports comprehensively, not just basketball. So starting this year, the Pac-12 Hall of Honor will recognize legendary former student athletes across all sports, men and women, starting tomorrow night. So we will have, amongst the 12 Hall of Honor nominees, 40 All-American honors, 36 NCAA team or individual championships as collegians, 8 of the Hall of Honor inductees you'll see tomorrow night have competed in the Olympics for the United States, and there'll be 6 gold medal winners. So it's a pretty cool representation of the excellence across the board that you see in sports within the Pac-12. And this event has now gotten to the point where it's a great platform and great showcase for Pac-12 overall. Before I take your questions, let me spend a few minutes talking about something I've gotten asked about recently, the status of the work of the Pac-12 Task Force, looking into issues around youth basketball and recruiting. We announced in October at our Pac-12 Media Day that we were forming a task force really shortly on the heels of reading about and hearing about the FBI investigations. Pac-12 leadership, our presidents, athletics directors, are certainly very concerned about that, wanted to make sure as a conference we'd be on the forefront of examining the issues and pulling together great minds that we have access to in that conference to be part of coming up with solutions that could help improve the state of recruiting and youth basketball as it interacts with collegiate basketball. So this group has been hard at work at various meetings. It's been a great cross-section of athletics administrators, former coaches, agents, an NBA general manager. We've got some experts from women's basketball and football look at implications in other sports. They've done some great work. And we've produced a set of findings and recommendations that I've had a chance to share informally with the Ncaa Commission, led by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and that I'll be sharing more formally with the Board of Directors of the Pac-12 Conference, our presidents and chancellors, on Saturday. This will be their first opportunity to review the findings and our recommendations. We'll get feedback from them, and then shortly thereafter, based on their feedback, I expect we will be releasing the findings sharing them certainly with the NCAA and their commission, but we'll also be sharing more of the details. Well, I can't speak to the specifics of the recommendations now because they have not been vetted yet with our presidents and chancellors and not formally approved. What I can share is that there are 4 baskets of recommendations. The first relates to Ncaa eligibility and the NBA's one-and-done rule, where we are certainly advocating for elite prospects to have a choice to go to the NBA or an enhanced G League out of college, so that they are not forced, as they are now by the NBA's rules, to have to come to college and play in a collegiate system for a year. It's our sense that that would be an important step in terms of having more clarity of purpose and mission, so that those young men that really solely focused on wanting to get paid to play basketball, they can go do that, and they have more better options quicker without having to come through the collegiate system. And those that are interested in the tremendous benefits that higher education has to offer, and being student athletes and working toward a degree and all the other benefits that you get from that, they come to college sports. We think there are some very positive analogs out there. Major League Baseball's rule, where young phenoms can do just that. They can go right to the MLB, or they can go to college. If they go to college, they're there for 3 years, and then they can be redrafted. It's been encouraging to see leaders in the game like LeBron James and Steve Kerr commenting recently about that. And I'm encouraged because I think leading voices in the NBA are going to have to be part of helping come up with that solution and driving change in the NBA's eligibility rules. Second area that we're going to recommend the NCAA look at significant reform around is recruiting rules and calendar, and taking our coaches more away from recruiting through the AAU system and private promoters, shoe company sponsored events, and trying to get more back to an education or scholastic-based environment for recruiting high school coaches, an environment where there are college coaches, high school coaches, working on skill development where they can evaluate there. And we think important progress can be made by changing the environment within which coaches are recruiting. We think education is an important piece of a set of solutions that we're recommending. On a couple of different levels. We're going to recommend that rules be liberalized in terms of when young men and their families can have access to agents and the advice that they can offer. Some of the problems that we're reading about have to do with families, getting information and getting close to runners, middlemen, because there aren't enough opportunities for them to get credible advice from college coaches, from agents earlier on in the process, as well as the NCAA in our schools. We'd like to see be able to be involved in this proactively, and we think that's an important piece of it. And then I think the fourth big bucket will be around NCAA enforcement. The FBI allegations and the revelations from the U.S. Attorney's Office have certainly brought into focus some of the challenges the NCAA and their enforcement apparatus have. Certainly the FBI's got powers that the NCAA doesn't have, to be sure, but I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call from many leaders in college sports that there needs to be more resources thrown at NCAA enforcement, higher caliber, maybe some outsourcing of what they do, and we've got more details around that will be in our proposals. But those are the four of the key areas, not the only areas, but four of the key areas that we're going to be focusing on. College basketball is really fantastic sport. March Madness is certainly one of the greatest sporting events in our country, let alone the world. We certainly think it's incumbent upon the leaders in college sports to look at some of what we've read about and heard about and are concerned about, and to have a bias for action and to find solutions to some of these problems. So certainly on behalf of the Pac-12, our objective with this task force is to be an important part, an important leader in finding some of those solutions, working with other conferences and the NCAA's task force and many others. I'll stop there and open it up to questions folks have on any of those topics or others.
If you have questions, please raise your hand. We have the handheld microphone. We'll get you a microphone. Questions?
Larry, just want to see if you have an update as far as some of these digital networks like YouTube and Hulu. Is it possible we'll see Pac-12 Network on any of those in the near future?
Yeah, I certainly anticipate you'll see us continuing to add new streaming partners. It's still early days in the world of over-the-top. Sling, Fubo are important partners that we have. And the great thing about that development is, regardless of who your cable company is or satellite company, any Pac-12 fan, any school fan, anywhere in the country can access via your device. So it's a little peek into the future. Fans are going to have a lot more different options and packages. I think there are packages out there as low priced as $10 a month on Fubo TV. If you're wedded to a carrier that doesn't carry the Pac-12 networks for $10 a month, you can get a package of channels on your device and get access to Pac-12 networks. And a lot of these are now offered in a way you don't have to sign up for multi-year contracts and some of the traditional barriers that fans have. Our team, I know, is certainly in touch with others that are out there currently, other streaming offers, some of the ones that you mentioned, and there are new ones on the horizon all the time. So, I think you'll see over the next few years, Pac-12 networks continue to be offered in more of these OTT packages.
Larry, when you entered into the TV contract, it was pretty much uncharted waters, and as it's gone along, it's obvious that there's some issues that need to be dealt with. Specifically the starting times, game times, 6-day windows, as well as the DirecTV package, and there's a lot of fan frustration. It's led to declining attendance in the stadium. A lot of perception is that there hasn't been enough pushback with the networks and the TV contracts, and you're not doing enough to solve those issues. Is that fair? Because it's leading to a lot of frustration out there.
Well, I certainly understand the frustration, and sympathetic to concerns fans have in terms of from their perspective, maybe less than ideal game times. So that's something we try to be attentive to. I know our schools try to be attentive to. Probably helpful to separate the issues in terms of game times, which is, I think, primarily driven by our ESPN and Fox contracts. The DirecTV issue really has nothing to do with ESPN and Fox. I think the frustration I hear from fans is they can't get Pac-12 networks if they have DirecTV and don't want to switch. But those are two very different sets of issues. I'm glad you asked the question that way, because I often read those issues getting confounded. And so it's a good opportunity to clarify. The number of nighttime games we play and the windows we're in is largely driven by the deal we did in 2011 with ESPN and Fox, where our priorities at the time were maximizing revenue and making sure we had national distribution for as many of our football and basketball games as possible. There was an important focus on closing what was then a very significant gap. I think the Pac-12 was fifth of 6 conferences in terms of revenue, and we were a very distant 5th in terms of media revenue compared to the others. And through a lot of due diligence and discussions with partners and with others, we made several changes to the conference in order to try to close that gap financially and get national exposure for our programs. We expanded the conference, we added a football championship game, and importantly, we agreed to more flexibility in when we would play games. We went from a minimum of 4 weeknight football games to 8 weeknight football games. Now we play Thursdays and Fridays. We gave more flexibility to our broadcast partners in terms of when they could choose for us to play on Saturdays. In basketball, we're a conference that traditionally played Thursdays and Saturdays. In order to get back on ESPN primarily, we agreed to play on Wednesdays and Thursdays, 2 windows each night, 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., as well as Saturdays and Sundays. Through all these steps, we had a very, very dramatic increase in the revenue that we got from our current TV contracts, which at the time not just closed the gap, leapfrogged all the other conferences. And we got all of our football games, 44 football games on Fox and ESPN, all broadcast nationally. Previously, many of them had been regionalized on ABC and Fox Sports Net. And our basketball, we were able to move off of FSN to largely on ESPN. We have 68 basketball games now on ESPN and Fox, and most of them are on ESPN, available nationally. So at the time, we achieved a very, very dramatic increase in revenue and exposure through all these steps. There have been implications in terms of those steps that we made to be responsive to the great concerns our schools had about revenue gaps and exposure gaps that got closed, created some other unintended consequences and concerns for fans. So since then, there have certainly been attempts to go back to ESPN and Fox to see how you could mitigate some of those concerns about nighttime games. But not surprisingly, they agreed to do certain things as a result of that flexibility. And so if you go back to them and say, we'd like to take back some of that flexibility, from their perspective, that doesn't necessarily make a lot of great business sense because, and this is also not always very well understood, the nighttime games in particular rate better in football, rate better than the daytime games for ESPN and for Fox. The last report I got at the end of this last season, on ESPN, I think it's 16% better. On ESPN2, 52% better. Why? Because during the day, there's a lot of clutter. There's a lot of fragmentation with so many football games. We're the only major conference that is kicking off at 7 p.m. Pacific, 7:30. And, of course, there's less TV viewers nationally in total, but Pac-12 gets the lion's share. So the business for our broadcast partners is they want as many good games in the evening as possible. That's where the tension lies. So we try to strike a balance. We've tried to mitigate the concerns our schools, and we hear from fans about the game times. But that's one of the primary reasons the broadcast partners agreed to do the things that we asked them to do. So there's not much more that really can be done between now and the end of the contract, which will be 2024. And leading up to that, it'll be a good time, like we did before the last TV contracts, to have a lot of discussions with our campuses about trade-offs and what's going to be most important when we do our next television agreements. And maybe there'll be a higher priority on different objectives than there was back in 2011, when it was primarily about catching up financially and getting national exposure. The DirecTV issue is really very narrow, not related to ESPN and Fox. Frustration fans have that they don't carry our network and don't appear interested in carrying it anytime soon. So our team, I know, has made great efforts. We've tried creative things, tried to offer school assets for sponsorship and other things, but nothing has really gotten DirecTV to the point where they've made even an offer for the network. So I don't anticipate that we're going to be on DirecTV anytime soon. Fortunately, not only do we have 75 different carriers, but the over-the-top options that we talked about, fans anywhere in the country, if they want the Pac-12 networks, they can get it. And if they don't want to switch, they have these over-the-top options that they've got access to. So that's where we are, and the world is changing very fast with new players coming in all the time. And I think every year that goes by, there will be more different options our fans have. But I do certainly understand, and I hear a lot about the frustration from DirecTV customers that have not been compelled to switch yet. Sorry for the long answer, but I often see some of these things confused, so it was a good opportunity for me to clarify.
Larry, I was just wondering, especially in light of the task force you've got, what you think of the current situation at Arizona, and did you get involved at all when Sean Miller was out for 5 days and the administrators were discussing it? Yeah,
Pac-12 didn't have a direct role in that. It was really the school, the university leadership, involved in responding to the media reports and the accusations. I had several conversations with the leadership of the university, trying to provide advice and counsel, and especially as new leadership at Arizona, both at the president level and the athletics director level. So, we've got compliance folks, we've got people that are very, very experienced in NCAA enforcement rules, and certainly those people were made available, and we tried to be there to help as much as possible. But at the end of the day, that was really a school decision in terms of how to handle. And as well, they consulted closely with the NCAA in terms of what to do, especially on any player eligibility issues. I think they worked through, an NCAA protocol. I know that the leadership, takes the issues very, very seriously. Spent, a lot of time on it. They have spending a lot of resource on outside expertise and lawyers and trying to get as much information as possible. I know they're very focused on trying to do the right thing.
Larry, along those lines, excuse me, if, say, Arizona and USC are in the championship game on Saturday night, is there any concern out of the league office about what the perception of that may look like to the rest of the college basketball world?
No, I'm not really concerned about that. I mean, you can only deal with the information in front of you. And I know both the schools are at the highest levels of the university treating the allegations very, very seriously. Both those schools have taken, concrete steps with assistant coaches. In the case of USC, a player that, was they deemed ineligible to play the whole year and has since left the school. Arizona obviously sat out their coach while they were investigating and looking into a situation. There's no question in my mind that the leadership of the university is taking these issues very seriously and trying to take the appropriate steps with the information they have at the moment. I know it's also a very challenging environment because some of the information we're reading about the schools don't necessarily have access to directly, but I know they're making every effort that I'm aware of to try to get as much information as they can.
With regards to the one and done rule, what steps can NCAA take or the Pac-12 take to help influence some change on the NBA side of things?
Yeah. Well, certainly conversation and sharing perspectives with leadership of the NBA and the NBA Players Association. I know I've had conversations with the commissioner and with the executive director, and I know both have had conversations with Dr. Rice and the NCAA panel. So I think there's good dialogue going on here. So I think some of us have also tried to communicate that and to really disabuse the possible notion that college might think one and done is a good thing. I've certainly been out there, I know others have too, trying to make clear we would prefer the NBA change its rule and that college sports does not have young phenoms that are not interested in staying in college for a while. Because I think there's been sometimes a notion out there that it's a college rule, that it's an NCAA rule, and that college just wants the biggest stars possible. And I certainly believe that college basketball would be healthier if it was reserved for students who value the education and are at the school for 3 years, like football players, like baseball players, and really making progress toward a degree. There are some cases with one and done athletes. They actually leave school before their first year. So one and done is actually, can be 3/4 and done. And I don't think that's a healthy thing for college. So we've tried to make that clear and have had conversations with the NBA and the NBA Players Association about our thoughts on that and some other things the NCAA needs to do and colleges need to do some of the things I outlined to try to improve the environment. And I believe that there's a lot of thoughtful leaders at the NBA. Certainly, I think if I look at some of the NBA player leaders and coaches, it's as thoughtful a group of stars in any sport that I've seen in recent history. And I think they can have a lot of influence on it. And I think those thought leaders around the NBA and the players, I think there are many that really want what's good for basketball overall, and they take a holistic view, not just what's good for our GMs and how we recruit, where one and done's like perfect. They love it. But I think there are some that take a more holistic view and realize that a lot of the names that are in the news and a lot of the athletes that are being talked about are their next-gen stars. And having controversy and turmoil and black clouds around some of these young athletes is not good for them, and it's not good for the NBA. So I'm hopeful that some of the leading players, as well as the leadership of the organizations, realize it would be better for basketball and certainly better for these young men to have a choice and get them to an enhanced G League or the NBA sooner.
Larry Tomatis from the Washington Post. Obviously, you've mentioned the investigation a couple times. Obviously, it's a big thing hanging over the sport right now. As someone who's in charge of one of the power conferences, how concerned are you about the potential widespread nature of this and the fact that while a couple schools have been caught up in it now, there's seemingly a possibility that more could be wrapped up at some point in the future? Yeah,
I'm very concerned about it. Because I think what we've been witness to, over the last 5-6 months with these reports is that, there's a challenge with the culture in youth basketball. Some of the commercialization and professionalization around youth basketball, and it's because a lot of these young men do have a lot of value and are trying to get to the league as soon as possible. When they get to the league, they're going to have a lot of value. So there's people around them and their families trying to capitalize on that. So I think, it's incumbent upon us, and one of the reasons we formed the task force was to also educate leaders in college sports and our own conference on what's going on. So, part of our task force report will be, a lot of findings and examination of what's going on. So I also don't think there's any silver bullet answer to some of the problems, because these issues start in youth basketball. There have been a lot of books written about it. There's been a lot that's been said about it. And so I think it is incumbent upon all entities that care about basketball. And that's why I think the NBA, the Players Association, as well as the Ncaa, our universities, maybe even USA Basketball and some others, need to be involved in collectively finding solutions to some of these issues.
Larry, how many teams do you anticipate getting in the tournament? And is there a concern, with the bracketologists and that, there's some teams that, have some impressive non-conference wins but didn't do well in conference that are seemingly getting more credit than teams that do well in the conference. Is there a perception problem with the conference in that regard? I don't think so.
Some of the teams in our conference have had extraordinary non-conference wins. I don't spend a lot of time looking at resumes of teams in other leagues, but I look at a team like Arizona State, for example. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a team in the country that challenged themselves, going on the road, neutral sites, playing the likes of Kansas and Xavier and winning those games. I think their resume, stacks up to any, and I think, the committee tries to encourage those types of schedules and then winning those games. They've then found themselves in a very competitive conference schedule, and they've got this really strong non-conference resume. And then, they had their challenges during our conference season, but they're a great case where I think they have gotten a lot of respect, and we'll see. There's a lot that the committee has to look at and consider, but I think they've got very, very strong case as well. And I think we're going to wind up with a good amount of teams in the tournament. Obviously, it still depends on some of what's going to happen here. But this has been a year for us where teams have really beaten each other up a lot. It's been pretty wide open. We're coming off a year where we had 7 teams in the tournament last year, 3 Sweet 16 teams, Final Four team. So, sitting, I try not to overreact to any one year. I try to look at the trajectory, the growth, the trends, and I think Pac-12 men's basketball is in a very strong place. So no one sits on their laurels. We're always looking at a way to improve, as are our coaches and our administrators. But I think, in general, the conference is very strong. I really like, the group of coaches that we've got, the kind of recruits that we're getting. As I said, last year was really good, and I think we'll wind up with a good number this year. We certainly have some teams that are close, but I think on balance, when I look at their resumes, I think we'll get quite a few in.
All right, that'll do it. Thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you.
Again, transcripts will be made available later today.